Jer si milostivi čovekoljubi Bog i tebi slavu uznosimo, Otcu i Sinu i Svetome Duhu, sada i uvek i u vekove vekova.
In a world of shadows and secrets untold, where primeval stories make the brave go cold, mighty gods on high and realms below, whispers of legends that shape each soul. And nightmarish dreams, cryptids lurking, nothing's as it seems, giants walking, angels and demons fight, only truth can bring the light. Through the echoes of time, the tales unfold, mysteries arise as the prophecies are foretold, from valiant knights to buried treasure, this podcast brings nothing but pleasure. Welcome to mysteries and majesty. Study with us, don't be a travesty. Theology, mythology, fantasy, and horror. Dungeons and dragons, Skyrim and Mordor. And Mordor powers haunt the evening, in gothic castles where they're screaming. Wizards cast spells in their towers tonight, exploiting enigmas hidden from our sight. Archaeologists make excavations deep of the ancient tombs where pharaohs sleep. In the dust of ages we chronicles keep, storytelling's power of monsters that creep. Mysteries and majesty is the place for you to learn about this haunted space. From scholarship to manuscripts of old, unlock the secrets of wisdom and gold.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Myths, Mysteries, and Majesty. I always enjoy this new song whenever I listen. I wish there is no end. And in my head, even when I go to work or on a train, I'm always thinking those words that keep resounding and Mordor. I'm like, this should be a cool song, like a soundtrack for some fantasy movie. But yeah, welcome to the latest episode, the episode that we title Archaeological Evidence for Vampires question mark, because we plan to tackle with some archaeological burial grounds and sites which were found in Europe in the last few years, analyzed. Some of them were even covered by American sites and news reporting platforms. So I also plan to mention that later. And this episode, in a way, not completely, but in a way, is a sequel to an episode which Paul and a couple of guys and myself did last year when we had this Halloween special episode. So we talk about different creatures when it comes more not just from lore and mythological aspect, but also when it comes to some evidence-based, and if I can say, semi-scholarly sources. So in that episode, and that is the episode which link I have provided in this episode, you can see in the body of the text. For the first 20-25 minutes, I talked about vampires being, some medical reports found in Serbia in 18th century and some other parts of Europe, including Turkey. And that episode is fascinating because in that episode, we are relying on those medical reports found on the 18th century and which are available for free online, not just on our podcast, but in general, you can see about this so-called Magia Posthuma report. And this is where I would like to start first, just briefly, so we can touch and have that connection with what we did last year. And then we plan to transfer to the modern day archaeological evidence. And before we start that, I just want to welcome Paul and Ben again to the podcast. And I want to say thank you, brothers, for finding time for myself and for the audience. And a quick question for both of you, and Paul, maybe you can start first. What is it about this archaeological evidence for potentially for vampires. It could be superstition. We will see soon. What is it about this topic that will draw you personally to like, hey, I want to learn more? And if this is somehow important for me as a Christian person, why? What would you say to someone in your church?
I think first I gotta say, second episode on the topic. I'm not really a vampire guy, but happen to do some crossover here. I kind of find some of this stuff interesting in general, things related to folklore and religious items in general, I guess, and just kind of finding out what's happened and what's out there and trying to piece together some factual material with stories. And trying to sort out kind of what was going on and what people talked about. I think we have a habit of maybe thinking that people in the past were uneducated or uninformed. And certainly they don't know some of the things we know now, but I don't think they're dumb by any means. So maybe we can see what we get to here today with some new reports and piece together what they found and what seemed to happen. And I know there's a couple interesting stories we're going to cover tonight.
Yeah. And so, for my part, I love this kind of stuff. Fringe stuff, cryptid things, different stuff like this. I've been reading and studying and delving into this stuff for, I don't know, probably, 30 years or more. Vampires specifically, way back before Twilight, was ever a glimmer in anybody's eye. It was like if you wanted to get a decent, fantasy story with vampires, you had to, read like an Anne Rice novel. And I remember back in high school, being criticized, people making fun of you and pointing fingers for, reading a vampire novel. And then Twilight came out and all those same people were like, and they loved it. But as far as, connecting this with our faith or, seeing, how this might matter to Christianity, I was actually having a conversation with some of the guys at work today, and I was just kind of explaining my take on stuff like this is that, when it comes to theology, when it comes to Christianity, you've got, the core stuff, right? And as long as you keep the main thing, then all the other fringe stuff that goes around it, we can have conversations and we can have disagreements. And is it important? Is it not important? And all that stuff doesn't matter. It's for fun that we look into it. And, if I look at the archaeological and historical evidence and I, come to the conclusion that, yes, vampirism was real, and somebody else looks at it and says, no, it's not, that doesn't change anything. If they're still a brother and sister in Christ, we're still a part of the same family, and that's good. That's fine. So I just kind of want to throw that out there, that this in no way, shape, or form has anything to do with, whether you, basically with your salvation or not. It's not like a core doctrine or belief. It's just something that's fun that we can look at.
Yeah, the way I see, and I do have some scholarly books when it comes to all these things of which I would classify as demonic. This is my thinking. In the past, this would be just mythology and lore and legends. Fun to watch, play, read, whatever. But then after encountering Bible in a deeper supernatural level, reading scholarship on some of the more supernatural aspects in the Bible, actually biblical sources. We did one episode with Paul, cover Saint Anthony and his monastic life and how he was constantly attacked by these shape-shifting demons. Once he saw a type of centaur or something like that. These things of writings you can't just avoid. You can ridicule them, you can point fingers and call them names. That's fine. But once when you encounter things, they're more not just of the ancient times, but also modern era, and they're usually reported by, I don't know, police officers, priests, pastors, national parks and forests, rangers, regular family people who don't have history of mental illness, abusing drugs or alcohol. They don't have any scandals about lying and deceiving people like that. And when you multiply these strange reports with thousands upon thousands just in one country, and we're here specifically talking about North America, there is something that has to penetrate your skepticism, my skepticism, including, makes you think, hey, what if this is there's something more behind this, something sinister, and maybe we don't understand it fully, but what if we can somehow connect this with the Bible and seeing, how these demonic things and demonic entities can take different shapes and forms, and they could be there not just to scare us, but also to deceive us, and they just make us just not just as their prey, but also maybe the enemies of the gospel and deceive us by taking us to another route. But what if we kind of attack and dissect this biblically? And what if this can help me as someone who is supposed to pray and have spiritual warfare to understand the enemy in a better way? So, coming from that background, also from the background, like Ben was saying, I've been loving weird stuff since I was a kid, and that's perfectly fine. Okay, let's see how we can connect somehow these things with the Bible. So trying to be biblical, trying to be scholarly. What we don't know, we can simply say we don't know. We don't want to assume. But also let's see where the evidence, and in this case, archaeological leads. And if any of these things happens to be true, I think it just proves our excitement living in the 21st century in this amazing universe that God made. To see more layers and to enjoy and to say, there is much more that I don't see or that I didn't think about or understand, but now thankfully I can. And I think that brings some certain pleasure and excitement about life itself. So that being said, like I said, the link is provided for our episode last year when we talked about these different cryptids, and where we spent like 20 minutes about this very article or similar article, which you can see now on the screen. The report, which came out in the 18th century by Austrian medical team that went to south of Serbia, not that far from my hometown, to investigate these supposed reports of vampirism, is found online, and this is one of the best articles which you can find. And I'll just want to read just a paragraph or two, because as you can tell, it's a very long one. I provided the link for this article as well. And then we can switch easily from this article to an archaeological one. So when it comes to Visum et Reparatum, right, it is one of the most important sources for the history of vampirism, and it was written and attested by military surgeons in Serbia. And again, these were Austrian, medical team, and this happened on January 26 in 1732. It was sent to the authorities in Belgrade, capital of Serbia, and Vienna, which is capital of Austria, because back then the north part of Serbia was occupied by the Austrians, and then south and east part were taken by the Ottomans, by the Turkish Empire. In fact, had it not been for this report, the word vampire and the stories of these supposedly blood-drinking corpses would probably not have been known, as consequently the popular vampire of authors like John William Polidori and Bram Stoker, as well as the vampire of the 20th and 21st century popular media, would not have come into existence. A copy of the original manuscript is stored in the archives in Vienna, but the text is mostly known in somewhat different versions through various printed sources. Curiously, it has rarely been translated into English, and this is certainly also the case of the report from the first investigation of the vampire case in late 1731, and other documents commenting on the report. So this is just to tickle your imagination. Please read the article. Again, the link is provided in the body of the text when it comes to this episode. So may this serve as the introduction both to the previous episode and this episode, that vampires were not just some folk tales where corpses will be decapitated so they cannot come back and attack their family, living family members and other people, usually in rural places and villages, because we usually tend to mock these things and see as superstition. And maybe it was superstition, but once when it was verified by an independent medical team, you have to scratch your head and think there could be something more when it comes to this. So the first archaeological article that we're gonna tackle with is called archaeologically documented vampire burials, and this following next several archaeological articles are coming from the same website, and also I have given the credit to this internet portal in my in the body text of this episode. So I was thinking if maybe you, Paul, want to start by reading this, and then we can all of us can start commenting on the article.
So our first article is from 2022, and contents goes like this: in Central and Southeastern Europe, several.
Oh, I'm sorry, you can't see my share screen, right?
I don't see your share. No, I've got it here separately.
Okay, can you see
There we
now?
go.
Okay, here we go.
All right. I was going to go down to the body. Central and Southeastern Europe, several hundred so-called vampire burials are known from the early Middle Ages to modern times. Most were recorded in Poland, even more than 50 deviant funerals. But there are also such funerals in Bulgaria, Serbia, Greece, the Czech Republic, Romania, and Italy. Often due to infectious diseases or disabilities, people in the past were buried differently or in other places. This led to vampirism being attributed to deviant or unusual burials. So who are vampires? Vampires are evil mythological creatures that roam the world at night looking for people whose blood they feed on. Most people associate vampires with Count Dracula, the legendary bloodsucker of Bram Stoker's epic novel Dracula, which was published in 1897. But the history of vampires began long before Stoker was born. A vampire is a mythical creature that feeds on the blood of living creatures. According to folklore, vampires often visited their loved ones and caused misfortune or death in the community where they lived before their death. According to tradition, vampires wore shrouds and were described as bloated, ruddy, and dark-faced, as opposed to the more recent version of bony, pale, long-nailed vampires that dates back to the early 19th century. Belief in vampires spread throughout Central, Eastern, and Southern Europe during the Middle Ages. The name vampire comes from the Serbian language, when it was first mentioned in the 17th century. Later, this word was adopted in all other European languages. However, the word vampire and its meaning are much older. Belief in vampirism was associated with pagan spiritualism and spread considerably after the Christianization of the 10th and 11th centuries.
Okay, before we go forward, I know, Ben, that you've been studying when it comes to the context of vampires. And before we continue reading, and I would also like to say something briefly. What is it that you would like to share with the audience when it comes at least to something basic about vampires that Paul or myself or the articles didn't mention yet?
One of the things that I found that I guess is worth noting is that it seems like the majority of the myth and the folklore, and when I say myth, I don't mean myth like it's made up, like we think of modern day myth, but the story. It comes from the Balkans. And so, I think it's so cool that the majority of it comes from Serbian, and it's like, hey, I know it's Serbian. And because, growing up in America, you're typically only exposed to the English concept of what a vampire is. And so really the concept of it and what was recorded, in these diaries and these medical journals and stuff wasn't happening anywhere, near here. And so I just think that, I tried to do a quest to find, the oldest documented tale, and you can't really find it, a single oldest documented recording of vampirism or a vampire hunter or something, but all of the oldest stories come from this area of the world. And so I just like to point that out. I think that's really interesting. I think that's pretty awesome, actually, that's where it comes from, when that's a part of the world that, when it comes to this specific issue, not a lot of people even think about anymore, because it's been so overtaken, with your very typical, Western European attractive, kind of vampire image.
Yeah, I also want to say that even though vampire is the Serbian word that is used for vampires throughout the world, it would be still a lie for me as a Serbian to say, "Oh, this is where everything originates." Well, no. Before Serbia, there were supposed cases of vampirism in Turkey and in the Middle East, as everything else, good or bad, mythological, demonic, a lot of these things, as well as the Bible, originates in the Middle East. So if you just do, not you specifically, Ben, if any of us does, simple research, even the Sumerians had their own
Hmm.
vampires, so to speak. Lilitu, Lamashtu, Edimu, right? Lilitu can be someone who can be associated with Lilith, the screeching owl in the Bible, but also in the Jewish mythology as someone who is described as a female demonic entity. And in Sumerian mythology, Lilitu is a demon with bird feet that was said to be a vampire who preyed on babies and their mothers. She was described as an infertile maiden who would never let go of her chosen lover. So I'm just saying this so we can trace different sources throughout different continents and cultures and civilizations. Yeah, they didn't call them vampires like we
Right.
did, right? This is a relatively new word, but the concept, the type of demon behind this entity, and this is why I'm saying for us as Christians, these topics can be interesting from that type of studies. Not just like, oh, I like watching movies because, or reading novels. That's cool. But I'm saying from us as Christians who want to study the demonic type of entities and enemies we have out there, and if we trace that lineage from Middle East to the Asia Minor, and now we're going to South and East Europe, we see that this is spreading. It's probably spreading. It probably spread long time ago in different continents and countries that I'm not aware of. And again, even though the word vampire is relatively new in origin, the concept of this demonic entity that is feeding on people's not just fear but also blood is spread out throughout the ancient civilization. And in because I just read the beginning of that article, what was happening in the 18th century in Serbia, it's interesting how many of these events in Serbian vampire tradition, they were happening around water mills. I don't know what is so special about watermills, but there's these will be the special places that will somehow attract vampires, and many people would see some demonic manifestation at the nighttime, people being attacked, killed, their blood would be sucked out around these places and watermills. And this makes me even more excited once when I go back home. It's very hard to find these watermills because they were built and destroyed long ago, and no one builds them anymore because we get wheat and we get all these things now in a different way, way easier and faster than back then. But I would like to find one of those watermills, and if I would be allowed to maybe document an interview shortly for the podcast, because I would like to learn when it comes more of these folklore and roots of the Serbian vampirism. Before you continue reading, Paul, is there anything you would like to add on this?
I just had a thought. Again, this isn't really my specialty, but I'm aware, or I think it's interesting how the concept of vampire, what we might relate to a vampire, there's sort of eras of the description and things that happen. You've got stuff from the ancient world going back, I think, 4,000 years or so, Middle East, and even I think one of our articles actually talks a little bit about a find from roughly about 4,000 years ago in Serbia, and kind of what they describe or how they put it together. You do get this sort of night demonic creature that feeds on at least life force, if not blood, right? And then from stuff from about 1,000 years ago, we get sort of a description, but then it really changes, about 300-400 years ago. And I just had a thought that it sort of reminds me of kind of how we talk about aliens and UFOs as well. That you go back to, we could say ancient times, I guess, and otherworldly beings that were fairly angelic, for lack of a better description. But um, you go more modern, and all of a sudden they're from not on Earth, and they're more physical, and maybe they're from Mars, But then as our exploration and information widened, all of a sudden they're from beyond the asteroid belt to beyond our solar system, and their technology advances. And I see some of a similar progression. I think that's a little bit to do with the information available to humanity, but I think there's another development going along beside it. So we can talk about that a little bit as we go. Most of our articles tonight are kind of from the 17th, 18th, 19th century era of stuff, but there's a couple details that are older than that. So we just kind of put that in context as we go.
Cool. Whenever you're ready, I'm ready.
All right, we'll continue. So our first set of vampire funerals here, or the archaeology. So in Poland, during the 17th and 18th centuries, people performed apotrophic funeral rites intended to protect against evil for those people they suspected might become vampires after death. So this is a common belief, at least to a point. This involved placing sharp, curved agricultural tools, mostly sickles, over the body, or placing larger pieces of stone under the chin. The idea was that if a person rose from the dead, the sharp blade of the sickle would cut off their head, while the stones would pin her jaw and prevent her from preying on the living. And while we're there, so there's a photo of a skeleton, and that's the rusted blade of a sickle, which would be kind of the common practice. So the researchers of the study, whose findings were published in the journal PLOS-1, examined 60 of the 333 burials found at the Drawsko necropolis in northwestern Poland. 6 of them were so-called vampire funerals. The burials of these deceased were not concentrated in the same area of the cemetery, which indicates they were not buried at the same time. So we've got some evidence here that seems to span some time. A cholera epidemic instead of vampirism. So in order to determine the geographical origin of the people buried in Drawsko, the researchers analyzed strontium isotopes from the buried teeth. With that, they obtained results that showed that the buried vampires were not newcomers. Since the bones of the individuals showed no signs of violent death and were found to be native to the area where they were buried, the researchers concluded that these men and women may have been buried this way for other reasons. It was probably a cholera epidemic that affected these areas during the 17th and 18th centuries. Spread by contaminated drinking water, cholera can kill its victims in days or hours. Such a quick death would explain why there's no pathological marks that remain in the bones. In medieval times, when people lacked a scientific explanation for how cholera and other such infectious diseases spread, people associated it with supernatural phenomena. Study co-author Leslie Gregorica, a bioarchaeologist at the University of South Alabama, said cholera was attributed to the supernatural. They believed that people would come back from the dead, feed on living individuals, and cause the disease to spread.
Yeah, man. So it seems like I'm a little bit disappointed, but hey, we have to go by the facts. It seems like maybe it wasn't anything supernatural. Maybe it was just cholera, right? So it was killing people. And back then, of course, people didn't have microscopes, didn't know about all these microorganisms. They couldn't defend themselves in the way that we can nowadays. So it seems like as the author of the text already made their piece by saying, oh, there's nothing supernatural with this. It could be just, or it was most probably just a disease that they didn't know about back then. And that well could be the case. But I wonder, being separated a few centuries after the very event, and of course we weren't there, could it be that everything was just merely just a sickness, a plague, a mere medical event, or could be something else? Because again, we don't know, we weren't there. And could it be as well as like in Serbia, people weren't just superstitious, they're actually, as the medical reports from Austria are saying that, and again, you have to read that first article in its full length. Even the Austrian medical reports were surprised when they would excavate Serbian corpses that would be dead for weeks, if not months, and see them bloated with blood. color, full color, not even smelling like rotten flesh. Like, how is this possible? So in their scientific mind and in my own mind as a natural skeptic, I'll be like, well, yeah, these people are just superstitious. So I'm thinking, yeah, we weren't there in Poland when this was happening a few centuries ago. Maybe it was just some disease, but could it be that the locals were also witnessing something, and that's why they were doing this to prevent not
Mhm.
just the regular plague, but maybe the demonic plague from being spread out? I mean, we don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. Ben, do you want to say something?
Yeah, because in any modern research that you do into this topic, there's always the caveat put on there that says, well, this is because, in the 17th and 18th century, they didn't have modern science like we do today. And so it was all just based, in basically this like primitive understanding of how the world worked and, blah, blah, blah. And it gets downplayed and it gets poo-pooed. And I've heard a similar argument used before concerning the Bible when the Apostle Paul is on the island, wherever he is, Patmos or wherever, and he gets bitten by the snake, right? Snake comes out, bites him, he doesn't die, and the people start worshiping him as a god. And so I've heard a lot of people say, oh, it wasn't a venomous snake. Oh, maybe the snake didn't really get its fangs in him good. When they try to explain it away with a modern scientific Western mindset. But here's the thing. Those people on that island knew very well which snakes were good and which snakes were bad. They knew which snakes, if it bit you, you were going to die. And so for us to try and explain away, through our modern lens, what happened and say, oh, that wasn't a supernatural event, they just didn't know what was going on. I think that same line of thought applies to vampires, right? This was a belief that people could come back from the dead and feed on other living beings. Why would they think that? Just because they see somebody wasting away from cholera? Okay, that might play into it, sure, but that's not going to make little Timmy, come back with dirt on his clothes and, sharp teeth and try and bite somebody. You have to see it to think it, like, I don't think people are going to come up with a whole myth about people rising from the dead and attacking living beings just because they saw a lot of people die. Like when you see somebody die, that's where it ends. They died. Oh man, they died from a vicious plague. Well, maybe it's because they come back from the dead and they spread it by biting people. Did you see that? No. Okay, well, that line of thought stops there. I think they saw it. I think they saw something that looked like a dead person. Like the myth that cats have 9 lives. Like I swear, I've seen a cat. I've seen a cat that I killed before the next day that was back alive. Okay, so Pet Cemetery, people are going to say, okay, well, that's because all cats kind of look alike. Yeah, well, no, this was a very specific cat. No, like these myths come from somewhere, and even if you just look at it as the basic, non-scientific, you can take, let's just say these people are farmers, but they're good, down to earth, common sense people, right? Then they're going to be basing these beliefs on common sense, on a collective shared experience. Something has to happen to make them believe that. And it's not just going to be that people are dying in really terrible ways. That's not going to make you jump to the conclusion that somebody's coming back from the dead and doing it, unless you see it. Now, was it an actual resurrected human body versus was it a demon that appeared like a dead person? I don't know. There's some speculation there. I also wanted to throw out there that, when you look at this stuff from a biblical mindset of, a divine counsel worldview, right? And I think that's kind of all of our connection, to each other, is that we share, this basic belief that there is more going on in the spiritual realm than just angels and fallen angels. And that's all there is to it. that there's actually kind of a myriad or a spectrum of spiritual beings that exist in these planes that are not our normal physical typical plane, but that these spiritual entities can come and interact. And so you get these stories, and like you said, they go all the way back, Mesopotamia, ancient Hebrew. They don't call them the word vampire, but they all have these stories of these demons or demonesses, that feed on the life of other people. And so I feel like when you see something like that bridges and spans multi, cultures, ancient cultures, then it was probably something that was experienced by people pre-Tower of Babel. And so it was a shared experience. And then as people were disseminated across the earth, it was carried with them. And in instances like we have here now, 1400 years, 1700 years later, they're seeing these same things. Again, you can't just explain it away and say, oh, science has proven this wrong. I think that you have to look at it and say, hey, you know what? Maybe I thought I saw, Aunt Gertrude, killing somebody last night, and she's been dead for, 3 months. Well, let's go dig up her, coffin and see. And they dig it up, and all of a sudden, yeah, they're bloated with blood. Okay. Yeah, maybe to a certain extent, it's like we know that hair grows after death and fingernails grow after death. The gums recede. Maybe it makes it look like there's fangs. There's scientific explanations for some of it, but not all of it. You can't just explain it all away. It's grounded in something that was real and was tangible, or I don't know. The people couldn't have just made it up and come up with it on their own. Sorry.
No, perfect. Just before Paul goes on, before he comments, I just want to say, Ben, the cat that you're dealing with, was it like a regular animal cat? It sounds more like a Terminator cat because it keeps coming back. It's like,
it was a mean cat. I didn't like that cat, man. I shot that thing with a BB gun. I hit it with a blow dart gun. I think I threw it out in front of a car one time. It just kept coming back. Sorry.
I hope you did this when you were a non-believer, because this would sound horrible in the podcast.
I was a child, and I did not like cats.
For people I needed that context in a way someone wants to sue me or like to say something.
No. Yeah, this was a long time before I was a Christian.
Just a kid. Okay.
Yeah, no, I was a kid, and I had a traumatic experience with cats as a kid, and so I grew up with a deep-seated hatred of cats. But now I'm a very cat-friendly, loving cat person. I have 4 cats and 4 dogs, and so yeah, animals are great. And I think cats are better at spotting demons than dogs are. So there you go.
Cool. Paul, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Ben said, but I'll throw a different angle on it. Some of this stuff, they're suspecting cholera, and that was common. Cholera is water-based, so maybe that makes sense why a lot of these stories happen at water mills or close. You got lots of water, people working on it, unsanitary, so maybe that's where people are getting sick. I don't know. Makes some sense. Cholera dehydrates you, which leads to bloating and stuff. So again, I can see pieces and I can see sort of a scientific explanation for it, but then there's other things that don't add up. I will say, I can also understand in periods where there was plague, lots and lots of sickness, outbreaks. People can go into frenzies and hysteria takes over, and maybe you get stories. Okay, but we have a pattern over thousands of years from different areas with similar reports, similar attributes to it. So to just say there's an illness, what I think is happening, I think there's probably some other explanation, and I would lean towards supernatural because I believe in a active supernatural world. I also think there's probably some people that just got sick and people didn't understand, and that these things are being blended together, which makes it even harder to understand. So we have to look at it and kind of figure out what fits and what doesn't fit, and that's hard when we're, in some cases, hundreds of years removed, but we do the best we can. I just don't know why, if you're seeing someone bloated and sick, and even if it's sudden, why do you decide you need to pin their throat or cut off their head? Like that part doesn't make sense to me, and there's just other stuff going on. So it's interesting that they had this here, and that the article kind of explains the traditional vampire views, but then switches very quickly to a sort of a modern pathological explanation and just kind of leaves it there. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Now we have the second article, which is titled "Archaeologists Found the Graves of Quote Unquote Vampires." So this is the first picture of this article. Ben, would you like please to read this one, and I'll do the next one.
Okay, sure thing. So yeah, we saw the picture there with the skull having been decapitated and placed in between their legs. That was one of the things that was actually pretty common if they suspected, a body of being a vampire. They would decapitate it, along with possibly putting stones in the mouth, the sickle around the throat, crosses, good old-fashioned wooden stake through the heart, and then burying them. Was something that was actually used a lot. So, all right, here we go. It says, in the village of Luzino in northeastern Poland, archaeologists made an extremely interesting, but at the same time terrifying discovery. During the works on the village street, the grave of vampires began to be discovered. The inhabitants of this village were afraid of vampires, so they buried the deceased in accordance with those beliefs. This type of burial has been preserved to this day. In some skeletons, the skulls were cut off after death and placed between the legs. This behavior could stop the dead from rising from the grave. And there, it says it was believed that if a member of the deceased's family died shortly after the burial, then he or she could be a vampire. Yeah, so yeah, there we see that's a different picture of them holding their head down there. Okay, on a practical note, how gory is that? To take a dead body and chop the head off, and chopping a head off's not easy anyway. That's got to take some conviction that you're doing what needs to be done, for the sake of benefiting people.
I was thinking about some dark humor when you were telling they would decapitate the body, they would like penetrate the heart with a stick, they would burn this, they would do this. And I was thinking, dude, what was left to be buried?
Yeah.
Their feet, like what was left to be buried?
Not enough to come back and hurt anybody.
Yeah, you go to the grave of the Uncle John, but he's not there. It's just like maybe clothes he used to wear, like everything is burned or destroyed or like thrown away, or like for them just to be safe, like, hey, Uncle John is not coming tonight to like attack one of us. And it's like, I know it's not funny, it's just kind of dark humor, but I'm thinking poor people, what they had to go through to, even if they were just thinking about, hey, what if this happens? Even if it was just a mere superstition, like imagine that type of fear they had to live. Like what will happen in the nighttime when we go to bed? Like, and this was before the time of electricity, so they would go to bed early. And in the wintertime, usually when there will be these, vampire attacks and all these, like, and then you hear this, someone walking on snow, like, or like you hear sound out of your house, or like everything was back then was made of wood. So like you hear something, like, you don't know if it's wind blowing or if it's like a wild animal, or maybe, hey, it's Uncle John being resurrected and now he's going to attack us. Like, I can't imagine that, the fear they had to go through, especially in small communities, how their kids survive. Would they have nightmares? How would they live at the nighttime? The whole community would have to be there for each other. But what if sometimes your house would be like, I don't know, this is not an isolated case. In many villages in Serbia and rural places, in that village, one house can be like a few hundred yards from the next one. Until you go get help, it could be too late. So again, try to portray yourself there in a rural place, on a mountain, or just beneath the mountain. Maybe your neighbor is not that close. You don't have weapons as we have today. Imagine that fear if someone would died recently in a village, and you may think, oh, back then when this person was alive, one time we had an argument. What if this person comes up to me, maybe not the first time, but maybe second or third time, and not just about me, what about my wife and kids? So
Yeah.
it's much more than just, oh, they're superstitious. Yes, they were. That's one of the normal things for all the ancient people. They were, but they also witnessed different things. I can't say for this specific village in Poland, but I mean, even if they're just superstitious and nothing was happening that was supernatural or paranormal in their village, imagine that fear and nightmares going through this. Like, will I be the next victim? Will my family also be turned by a vampire, like tomorrow or 20 days from now or 30 days from now? Like, even if something happens, will I tell others, or will I just try to say, if someone disappeared, uh, do we even want to say they were beaten by someone? Or they will say, oh no, my husband went, in another country for a business trip. He'll be back in a few months, trying to protect you and your family. But then again, what will be your next excuse? And of course, I'm just coming up with this story as I'm thinking, and I'm just imagining all these things come in waves, like pictures and images, as I'm trying to portray myself as I'm in this, remote village underneath the planet, and it's like underneath the mountain, and it's getting snowy, and it's like cold, and all those creepy, eerie, wind sounds. It's like you're like, ooh, it's like making me uncomfortable. And as a man of the house, I need to protect my home. So I'm just thinking out loud.
Yeah. It's interesting because, we keep talking about this, and we keep, talking about how superstitious these people probably were. I just want to say I'm not superstitious, but I am a little stitious.
I heard that long ago. Was that in a movie or a TV show? Where did this come from?
I think it's from The Office.
Yes. Okay, and we also have Joshua Davidson. Hey, Josh, who said the same. He's also a little bit stitious. Okay, Ben, I'm ready to scroll.
All right, yeah. Let's keep going. All right. So for this reason, after the burial, the grave was dug up and the deceased's head was cut off, which was then placed between the deceased's legs. In about 30% of the graves, archaeologists found bricks placed next to the skeleton's legs, arms, and head, and in some, coins in the mouth. Also, we discovered the burial of a woman who was beheaded, and the skull of her child was placed on her chest. Hopefully, he was dead before they cut the head off. The burials date from the 18th and 19th centuries, a century when this anti-vampire practice was applied in this area. So that's even coming into more modern day, ages now. Archaeologists also found 3 ossuary with several scattered human skeletons. Future analysis will provide more answers. Historical records of undead people or vampires in Central Europe date back to the 11th century. People feared cold-blooded creatures that drank blood and terrorized the living. That's why it's not uncommon in Poland to find graves where the deceased has a metal rod driven through the skull or a stake through the chest. People at the time believed that this was one way to ensure that a person would stay dead and never rise from the grave. Iron was used a lot too, and so you'll find in the coffins, iron nails would be used, and then they would be bent over at the top to make it that much harder to open from the inside.
Paul, would you like to say something before I switch to the next article? I know I spoke a lot a few minutes ago. Oh, if you want me to say something, well, no, basically that was it. I just find it that's interesting that even though this is a Serbian archaeological portal, which we had, to translate from Serbian to English for tonight's purpose, I just find it how we'll see also some archaeological digging later from Croatia, and Serbia and Croatia used to be one country back in the days. I just want to say how it's interesting that Poland had more cases of vampirism or supposed vampirism that I was aware of. So again, this wasn't just Middle Eastern thing. This wasn't just Sumerian Turkish thing, not just only Serbian thing. It was even going more to the Eastern Europe. And as we saw this by the end of this article, in the Central Europe as well, centuries before the word vampire was officially used for the first time Serbia. So again, we see only glimpses here and there, but God knows how old is actually this, I would say, demonic, plague that has been ravaging different cultures throughout the ages. Um, and I wish I can learn more. I have some books, scholarly books on vampires, including from the priest Montague Summers, and I plan to study them. And maybe one day in the future we can make a more scholarly episode when it comes to these bloodsuckers. Okay, Paul, it's your turn.
I would say let's just keep going. Yeah.
Okay, so the next article we have for tonight, it's this one, and it's my turn to read it. Okay, it's titled Archaeologists Have Discovered a 400-year burial of a vampire child. Okay, this is unfortunately sad to watch, but I mean, it is an archaeological website with archaeological data and photos, so this serves, for us to be educated and to learn. But nonetheless, it's a sad story. An unusual burial of a child believed to be a vampire has been found. A small child of 5 to 7 years was buried face down. Okay, this is new information. I never heard that before. Face down with a padlock between his feet so that in the case of resurrection, he can run and attack him to prevent him from rising from the grave. The terrifying burial of a child in a village in Poland. Again, Poland. What's up with vampires in Poland? Vampires love Poland. I mean, their women are gorgeous. Maybe that's why. I don't know. But anyway, archaeologists from the Nicolaus Copernicus University in Tornie made a dark discovery. They found the burial of a child with a triangular padlock between his legs. Research at a cemetery in Pienie has been going on since last year. Although this is not the first case of the burial of a quote-unquote vampire, it is the first case of the burial of a child they believe to be believed by the locals to be a vampire. The first vampire burial is attributed to a young woman who was buried in an unusual manner. She had an iron sickle around her neck, and I think that's the first article we read, and a closed triangular padlock on the toe on her left foot. Researchers at the time believed that this was a practice that would prevent the deceased from rising from the grave in the form of a vampire or some other mythical beast or inanimate creature. So this was how the funeral of the vampire child was performed. In July, so this was July of, 2023, okay? So in July, a team of archaeologists headed by Dr. Dariusz Polinsky, professor of UNK, announced that over 30 new graves were discovered at the cemetery in Pienia. One of them turned out to be particularly terrifying. Archaeologists discovered the grave of a 5 to 7-year-old child who was buried face down. It was believed that the deceased would bite into the ground and thus would no longer pose a threat to living people. Okay, I see. It will, correct me unless I'm wrong. Does it mean like the in this case, like the dead child would, because it would be face down, even if it would manage to bite the coffin and the ground, but it would continue their way downwards and thus in the realm of the dead, but not the realm of the living? If so, how interesting is that if we would compare that with the Old Testament and Sheol and the underworld, and also all these mythologies, including Greek mythology of the underworld. So would you like guys to say something before I continue?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. That's exactly what it is. They buried the kid face down. So if he was to come back to life, he or she were to come back to life and start trying to dig out, they would end up digging down. They're headed towards Gehenna or Sheol. They're not coming back up on this side of the grass to mess with people.
Yeah, I think the other thing too, the article implies that this child, somewhere between the ages of 5 and 7, that age of a child to die is pretty tragic and kind of terrifying because that's not the way life should go. But this is even more so because it's not like a child that's stillborn or something. If this body is being buried face down, which is very unusual, they must have suspected something. So why is this kid being buried this way? Which is sort of creepy in itself.
I just want to say this was the funniest comment I've seen in a long time. The chance said 1,000 subscribers because we need less than 20 more, or Polish girlfriend by Christmas. I may even go by Polish girlfriend. I may wait for those 20 extra subscribers for a little bit longer. That's fine. That's fine. As long as that Polish girlfriend doesn't have a history of vampirism in her family, including extended family. So I may have first to do some DNA test before I continue to step into the marriage, just to be sure. I mean, anyway, it is interesting that the burial was discovered very close to the burial of the vampire from last year, only 2 meters away. Wow, so this is kind of the same cemetery. Wow, 2 meters. That's how our archaeologists confirm that they come from the same era. It turns out that the child was also buried with a triangular padlock, almost identical to the one found in the grave of the vampire's wife, and in the same place at the feet. However, that is not all that archaeologists have found. After the burial, someone opened and disturbed the child's grave. Of the child's skeletal remains, only the lower legs and feet were preserved. I know I made this joke like 15 minutes ago when Ben was commenting on something like how the body of a vampire would be destroyed. And then I said, well, what's left to be buried? Feet. And here they just mentioned only the lower legs and feet were preserved. It's a funny coincidence. It is possible that the desecration of the grave was intentional. DNA analysis will reveal the sex of the child, and the continuation of the research will bring new knowledge. So all these articles are pretty much short, but I mean, of course, they don't know much, so they couldn't include a lot of information. But I think they have enough information to stir up our mind and imagination, and to think about the layer of vampirism that we maybe didn't know before, just like in the case of a kid being face downwards. Okay, Paul, yours is the next article, but I just want to have a question if anyone want to comment when it comes to the conclusion of this previous article.
Well, I thought it was interesting that they mentioned that they found another vampire burial before, and they reference a wife, and now here's a kid. So, like, is this a whole family that was buried because they suspected or something? Did this kid suffer because someone else was suspected as a vampire and they had to bury everybody? I don't think that the articles we have talk about the original vampire grave necessarily. But the fact that the wife had this padlock was chained in the grave, like the child was done the same way. That just caught my attention that there's at least 3 of them, possibly from the same family, that were all dealt with this way. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of riff off of that same thought, they mentioned that it was believed that if a relative became a vampire, right, that they would come back and visit their family. And we see that even in a lot of the modern day representation of that folklore. If a child dies and is resurrected as a vampire, they come back and visit mom and dad, or parents, spouses will come to each other and that kind of thing. So maybe that's exactly what they thought happened. Maybe mom died and they thought mom might have turned dad, or the kid by association was going to be a vampire, or maybe so. As grim a prospect as that is, if that's the assumption that they're operating under, maybe it was just a matter of you got to kind of get rid of the whole family unit to be free of it.
Yeah, before I tackle Amber's question, of course, you two guys can also speak your mind. I want to say, I hope this wasn't sort of a medieval witch hunt. Like, oh, there was a rumor that this person or this family said or encountered something supernatural or divine or whatever weird. So now let's kill all of them, and not just kill them, but also let's make sure that their bodies are buried in a certain way that they may not come back, even though the family could be very well perfectly innocent. So I'm just hoping, even though this is centuries old, but I'm just hoping for the sake of justice and how we treat our neighbors, that this family wasn't just portrayed as a as, oh, these are like the devil worshippers, look at them, let's kill them all, and not just kill them all, but let also desecrate their bodies and do all of this because of a supposed witch hunt. So I'm just hoping that wasn't happening, because it would be horrible, especially in the case of a child. Now, when it comes to Ember's question, and by the way, that's I believe, the name of her podcast. Ember, can you please confirm? And if it's so, I would also invite you to subscribe to her podcast as well. So her question is, if a person becomes a vampire, do they lose the image of God? Okay, I'll go first. Well, vampirism is basically a perverted and cheap imitation of the real resurrection. So let's say this is true, right? But you disappear, you yourself disappear who you truly are. Your body comes back, but it's not your conscious, the same consciousness. It's not the same you, right? It's not the same Uncle John. He has disappeared. His spirit, who he truly is, made in the image of God, is gone, right? But his body is back. So his image of God is intact in my theological understanding, because that's not anymore your Uncle John. It's the body that is dead, but it's alive through, whatever paranormal activities, and again is the cheap imitation of what Christ did and of our future resurrection and glorification, right? So I don't think we can ever lose the image of God, because it's impossible. It's deeply engraved in us as image bearers from God. So once when you die, whatever happens with your body, it's not your fault. Even if it comes back in a zombie state, you don't lose to carry that image of God, because to carry an image of God, it's not in your flesh. It's in your soul, and we are the living soul embodied in this flesh. So I would think that, his image of God is perfectly safe and intact. Paul and Ben, if you want to say something on this.
Sure, yeah. So as shorthand, I define the image of God as the ability to represent God, to enact his kingdom here. If we're talking about a vampire, supposed vampires being very ill people with weird side effects and consequences and buried in a story made up because of that, they retain the image of God, because it's probably a mistake of just a sick person. If we're talking about some kind of supernatural transformation that is, either rising from the grave or undead, and especially if you're attacking other people and disrespecting the image of God in other people, I would say then yes, you've probably lost the image of God at that point, because you're transformed into something completely. I mean, you're demonic, and I don't think demons are representing God. Whether or not God can redeem that from a human that's been transformed some way, hard to say. But I'm inclined to say, that's a very negative stance anyways. So,
Yeah. So that whole line of thought is actually something that Anne Rice kind of deals with in some of her later vampire novels. She reconverted to Catholic after writing her, Lestat series. And so it was something that she kind of grappled with in her books. If somebody, is a professing Christian and is turned against their will, have you now taken from them the opportunity to go to heaven, should they ever die? Are they damned to hell now, no matter what, because of this demonic, thing that has taken possession of them? And, I liked what Nico was saying about, your soul, is still your soul. Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at it from a physical standpoint and you're like, okay, so they're sick, they're dying, no, that doesn't, take away the image of God. That's just, a part of living in a fallen world. They're still imagers. If you're looking at it, yeah, from a spiritual point of view, is it a demonic possession? Are they dying in some kind of apostate state? Did they invite the spirit to come into them? with my experience with the occult and when I was a witch, I got inducted into, a coven at one point, and a part of joining that coven was having to renounce the image of God over your life. I wasn't even saved at that point, so it didn't mean anything for me to say that. But you had to verbally invite, like invoke, a demonic spirit into yourself. And before doing that, before it would work, you have to renounce your humanity and claim for yourself as becoming a carnal animal or creature of magic, and revoke any ties or any image of God. So, if something like that were taking place here with this vampirism, if it was something akin to, crying out to Satan, or a demon and saying, come and fill me up, make me your creature, then yeah, I think you would absolutely, in that state of apostasy, not be, an imager.
I guess to rephrase or summarize that, if it is possible to lose the image of God for any reason, it's not an accident. It's not something that just happens to you.
Yeah, I still think, and of course, Ben is more equipped because of his past experience, like a witch and being in New Age. But I'm still biblically and theologically inclined to say there's no way you can lose your image of God, because it's impossible to stop being in the image of God. You would literally stop existing in any shape and form if you can not be made in the image of God, because all of us are made in the image of God, even the worst sinners, right? Even Judas. I mean, yeah, of course, one can summon or invoke a demon. So, when people say, "Oh, they sold their soul to the devil so they can be successful in music industry," I don't know if that's true or more of a legend. But even when that happens, I believe we're perfectly still made in the image of God and redeemable. We're broken, but I don't think anything can separate us from the image of God. Not just love of God, but image of God. That's at least my understanding. Maybe I'm not correct, but that's my biblical understanding. Paul, this is your next article, and voila, another one in Poland. We're so blessed with Poland, with these Polish articles. So yeah, this one comes. Okay, remember in Europe, month comes first, right? So this is from September 16 of this year.
Yeah, we're getting pretty recent here now. So,
Mhm.
and this one concerns what they think is a 13th century child. So, interesting here. During archaeological excavations in the former bishop's palace in Keln, Poland, 2 children's graves were found. One grave of a child that shows signs of a vampire burial stands out. In particular, the Institute's announcement reads, a child was buried in the vampire grave. His skeleton was decapitated with the skull placed face down. Heavy stones were placed over the body of the deceased. It is a well-known practice that prevented the dead from rising from the grave. According to archaeologist Dr. Stanislava Goluba, these burial methods reflect medieval superstitions and fear of the undead. Evidence of 2 poles, which were probably used to further contain the body, were also found at the site. The broader implications of this discovery are profound. Vampire burials reflect medieval society's deep-seated fears of the supernatural. In some Eastern European cultures, it is widely believed that certain people after death could return as vampires, threatening the living, spreading disease, or feeding on their blood. Such beliefs are often associated with those who died under unusual or suspicious circumstances, such as suicide, or individuals believed to be possessed by evil spirits. Similar vampire burials have been found all over Poland. I find that interesting because they're calling this a medieval, practice of superstition, but in similar places we've read things, burials that they found from the 18th and 19th century. So how do you? Not that superstition just goes away magically when we get to the Enlightenment and stuff, but you've got like a 500-year difference, but similar things happening as well. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I tried really hard to see if I could find any news stories or any evidence of modern day vampire burial rites, and I couldn't. It doesn't mean it's not happening. It just, I couldn't find any recordings of it on the internet anywhere. Everything was, 17th century, 18th century, that kind of thing. I did come across a story not too long ago, and while it wasn't vampirism, it was something similar. I think it was referenced more like a Wendigo type thing, where you are transformed into a ravenous, spirit of cannibalism. So kind of similar in that, but that it's still actively practiced in Peru. That there, is a man there who, when he sees somebody who's suspected of turning into or becoming this kind of Wendigo spirit, that he kills him, and he does it, from their religious, through their religious rites, and the way that he had been trained by his father to do it, who trained his father, who trained his father. And the story that I came across actually said that this was as recent as, like, he and his son got arrested for it. And then when they were, taken to trial, within the last, 100 years or whatever, at the trial, his defense was, they weren't human anymore. If I didn't kill her, she would have attacked and murdered countless others. And that was his defense. And that was actually good enough in that culture that he wasn't, put to death. He wasn't, sentenced to life in prison or anything. I'm almost positive that was in Peru, if I remember correctly. So again, it's interesting to think, that stuff didn't just stop happening. So I wonder, to what scale do things like that still happen to this day that we just don't hear about, that we're not aware of?
And to be honest, archaeological websites report these things because they're things of the history of the past. So they're they're probably approaching these things through anthropological secular view. But if this will be happening nowadays, I don't know how much the modern archaeology would want to deal with that. They may think, oh, this is more for people who are like sociologists or into religious cults and fanatics and whatever is happening out there. I don't know if this will be still, unfortunately, a point of interest to modern day archaeologists who may think, maybe this will be interesting in 50, 100 years, but like nowadays it's like so. And to a certain point of, to a certain degree, I can understand, because they can get to be ridiculed, right? In every type of academia, be it archaeological, theological, philosophical, whenever you go and want to do something that is less popular or doesn't have too much evidence or it's more fringe, you always look suspicious by the majority. Always. We see this in churches, we see this in academia. I mean, check this with Dr. Heiser. Like, why it takes so much time for other scholars to come and say, yeah, we actually agree with this. I mean, yeah, there were people even before him, but some people, it took them so much time to not look at this by scorning and laughing at all of these things. And some of them are still doing that. We saw this by the Rin Virtue, right? And they may never change their minds, but it's not easy to penetrate that academic bubble. And in this case would be vampirism. I can't imagine if I'll be an established archaeologist and if I want to approach my colleagues, I would feel half ashamed, like, hey, how do you even start this topic? Unless I introduce a joke, or maybe I approach only those whom I really trust and say, hey, have you thought about this and this? But not like that I believe this, but have you thought about this? And we have certain data, dates, locations, excavations. It's interesting. Let's talk about this. So unless you can trust someone, I see why these things wouldn't be as popular as would be with people who love fringe stuff, supernatural stuff, like us on the podcast. So it is what it is. Um, okay, so I have PJ who said we have lore and rumors here about it. Well, in New Orleans, but because they really don't bury people in the dirt without vaults, so the people that were placed in mausoleums are attributed to vampires. Wow, that's interesting. I would like to read about this. PJ, if you have any link, please send it our way so we can learn. Okay, that being said,
That,
next. Oh, what
that's
do you
also
want?
interesting too, because the southern states in New Orleans, right, you get kind of a mix of um, religious practices, superstitious beliefs, the more common. So it's there. What I was going to say, I find it interesting. I don't know enough about archaeology in Europe, so I don't know how accurate this is to trace. I think there's probably eras that we can find more stuff from, and less. I know there's just certain periods of civilization where there's a lot of movement, a lot of destruction, so it's harder to find things. But these vampire stories, we're finding a lot of stuff from sort of the 10th, 11th, 12th century, and then again, a lot from the 17th, 18th, 19th century. And to me, that's significant because you have sort of a period with the real, as Europe was being Christianized first, and then a later period after Europe's been Christianized, but you've got the Enlightenment and some occult practice sort of comes up again for a couple hundred years, a lot, and then when you get to 20th century, and especially with stuff like communism in Eastern Europe, which sort of stamped out spiritual practices, or you were really chased after if you had it. That maybe it doesn't happen. I'd be really curious to watch in the next 50 years with some of the New Age stuff and the return to some of the cult practices, if we see stories or things like this happen again, despite our modern scientific, uh,
Cool. Okay, Ben, you have one article, and then I have one article from two different sources, and basically we'll be done for tonight. So less than 2 hours, which barely ever happens on the podcast.
All right. I'll just say this real quick, though, about Louisiana. I went through there on a road trip this last summer, and we stopped in the French Quarter in New Orleans to have some real authentic beignets. And I've been to a lot of places that felt spiritually oppressed, but never any place that were as blatantly oppressed as New Orleans, and specifically the French Quarter. Vampirism, demon worship, all of it is in your face around every corner of that area. It's crazy. Yeah, I went and ate at the Café du Monde. It's good. Okay, back to this. An unusual discovery in Croatia, a vampire grave in a luxurious wooden chest. We got a rich dead vampire here. The vampire burial stands out in the entire necropolis because of the unusual burial practice and the exceptionally well-preserved coffin. All other chests from that period have fallen into disrepair. Only the wooden chest of this vampire has been completely preserved. Let's see, the site of the old town of, hard word, Pakrak, is a medieval fortress built in two phases. The first phase refers to the arrival of the knightly order of Slovenia at the beginning of the 13th century, and the second to the determination of the locality due to the increasingly intense penetration of the Ottomans into Slovenia. It is known from historical sources that the Crusaders came to the city in the 13th century at the earliest. According to the style of construction of the stone church, it's believed that they came straight from France. Most scientists advocate the thesis that the town was founded by the Ivanovo people, who are mentioned by name in the 14th century, although many evidences point to the possibility of a Templar founding of the town. Archaeologist Kresimir Vasek from the Museum of the City of Pakraca told all about archaeology. Dude, we've got French, we've got the Templars. Let's throw some Freemasons in there. We're going all out here.
We can make a novel or a movie just for this.
Archaeological research at the old town in Pakarac began in 2017 and continues to this day. They were carried out in 8 consecutive research campaigns. Since 2017, the Institute of Archaeology from Zagreb has been conducting research in cooperation with the Museum of the City of Pakrac. And since 2021, the Museum of the City of Pakrac has taken over the research and is conducting it to this day, says Kreslemir. I know I'm butchering these names. Sorry, guys. This year, strata up to the early 16th century north of the church and a 14th century stratigraphic unit in the south yard are being explored. The total number of deceased around and inside the church that was discovered is slightly less than 100, and their burials date from the 13th to the 17th century. Among the discovered burials, the vampire burial from the Middle Ages stands out. It is an inhumation burial in a wooden chest, which differs from the chests found so far on the site, says the archaeologist. Kreslemir explained to us the wooden chest from the younger periods, that's 13th to 14th century, were not recorded because they had fallen into disrepair, but that their existence is indicated by the nails found. The large wooden chest found is actually a luxurious wooden sarcophagus. Are we Egyptian now? In the form of the gabled roof with vertically placed gables, the chest is in excellent condition because it was submerged in deep mud for 8 centuries. They should crack it open. When archaeologists opened the chest, they found skeletal remains, probably a man, but without a head. Usually such burials during the Middle Ages and in the new century are attributed to vampire burials. It was believed that if the deceased does not have a head, he will not come out of the grave and cause harm to the living. There are 2 practices of defiling such deceased. When before burial, stones or bricks are placed on them so that they do not rise from the grave. That is when their grave is opened later to stop their lifting from the grave, explains the archaeologist from the Museum of the City of Pakrac. Ooh, yeah. That's gnarly looking. Yeah, all those bones just laid in there, not like a human body should be laid out. In addition, with the vampire in Pakrac, parts of the animal's jaw were found in place of the head, which were placed here. The intention is to magically further disable the vampire from coming out of the grave and doing evil to the living. Based on relative stratigraphy, it is known that the vampire from Croatia was buried in the middle of the 13th century, but C14 analysis will give more precise dates. The belief that the evil deceased to do harm to the living dates back to the Younger Stone Age, when the deceased were buried with a stone in their mouth or had stones placed on their chest and head so that they would not get up, or they were tied during burial, Kreslemir explained to us. All right. Based on archaeological research, it's known that this practice of vampire burial became more frequent during the Middle Ages and in the new century. So far, most examples have come from Poland and even Bulgaria. Stones were generally placed over the deceased or in their mouths. One of the most famous examples comes from a medieval necropolis in Poland, where sickles were placed around the necks of the deceased. With the advent of the new century, more and more historical records about vampires appear. The first one was recorded in Croatia in 1403, concludes Kreslemir Vasek. Anthropological analysis will reveal detailed information about the deceased and perhaps provide some answers as to why he was buried this way. I want a full-on DNA analysis if there's anything other than human in there. Let's get on it.
Okay, I don't know if Paul wants to say something. My point is that I'm actually glad that I'm not glad if anyone suffered, especially unjustly, okay? Or if their bodies were desecrated, after they died, of course. But I'm glad that this is found in more and more countries, so it wouldn't be something isolated to say, well, those primitive people in Middle Ages in Serbia, or those primitive people in Poland. Now we have Croatia, we have Bulgaria, we have probably more countries, coming up with this. And of course, this doesn't have to be any credible data because, again, it could be mere superstition. And, because all of these countries are connected, because they're all in Eastern Europe, it could be a similar case with the Old Testament and the Jews having similar beliefs the global, well, the big flood, giants, divine council, just with their pagan relatives and neighbors of that time. So it could have been that this was just something that was a shared belief without too much of evidence. It could have been just one of those folk tales that old people would tell kids to make them scared so they can listen, to discipline them. Again, it could be something like that. We don't know. We know that credible report from Austrian medical report, again, from the early 18th century in Serbia. But unfortunately, we don't have all those credible reports with so many details when it comes to all these burial excavations in Poland, in Bulgaria, in Croatia, and in other places. And I wish we had more, because then we can start piling up bigger picture and getting all these small details. But when it comes to this article, I'm noticing how the new detail is they'll place stones in the dead people's mouth, right? So in the previous article, we saw that they would place big stones on the chest of the deceased person because it wouldn't have, let's say, it becomes a vampire, wants to rise and hurt the people. Well, now all this big heavy stone that is placed on their chest, they can't get up, right? But in this case, it will be placed on their mouth. That's the first detail I noticed that is new in this article. The second one would be a certain animal bones, because of this supposed magical rite or supposed influence it can have on the vampire, that through certain things it could enhance this ability of keeping the vampire in its casket. So I'm just enjoying learning all this new data that we didn't see in the previous cases. So I think, as it comes with so many different things in theology, religion, and mythology, it's not just a monolithic thing, right? So we see nuances and different layers from town to town, from country to country, from continent to continent. There are many similar things, but there are also nuances, like, oh yeah, but we also used to do this. Oh, we also used to practice this or believe this. So again, it's not a monolithic beliefs of vampires. You just take the stick through their heart or cut their head off, boom, you're finished. Like, we see all these different practices because people were scared and trying to come up with new and different solutions how to get rid of this demonic pest, if that was truly what was happening. I have one more article, but Paul, would you like to say something?
Yeah, just one thing I was saying. So I think they said it was a jawbone of an animal that was placed. And so I don't know if I'm misreading that or thinking, but to me, it seems like they actually put like an animal head in place of the human head, maybe so it wouldn't go back or reattach or something. Like, I don't think it's just random animal bones, but it seems like it was a head for a head. Or at least that's kind of how I'm reading it. The other thought I had, and this is just, well, it is what it is. Ben was saying, let's do a DNA test and find out what this thing is and go. And I just thinking, if we get some DNA that proves it's a vampire, maybe it's our one chance to answer the question, what's it like to be a bat? But yeah.
Alrighty. So again, we have only one more article left, but we have two sources. One is from Fox News. One is from the same Serbian archaeological portal. So let me first read the one that is originally in English from Fox. Okay. Scientists reconstruct face of 17th century vampire buried with sickle across neck, padlock on foot. Okay, so this is very common thing we saw. 2 years ago, a young woman's skeleton was found by archaeologists in Poland with an iron sickle around her neck and a padlock on her toe. And this could be the mother of that vampire child, supposed vampire child. I don't know yet, because some stories are very similar, or at least it could be in the vicinity of what we already found about that family. So I'll keep reading so we can see if that's the case. Likely anti-vampire practices, right? So this sickle across her neck and padlock on her toe, that researchers said may have been used to keep her from rising from the grave. The discovery was made in the village of PN. Okay, I think we already mentioned this town, where archaeologists have found other unusual burials. This woman, who was later nicknamed Zosia, okay, that's a new data, was buried sometime in the 17th century. She was between the ages of 17 and 21 when she died, according to researchers from Nicolaus Copernicus University, okay, I remember this detail as well, who made the discovery. The team later worked with sculptor and archaeologists Oscar D. Nilsson in Sweden to reconstruct Zosia's face using a 3D printed replica of the skull and clay, which was revealed this fall. And this is sad. She was a either a late teen or a young adult that was just stepping into her adulthood, and before who the whole life was to be there with family and work and stuff to enjoy, but fortunately she died young. Seeing the remains of Zosia with my own wife, with my own eyes, was emotional. It is such a sad story, Nilsson wrote in a Facebook post on November 1st. It led me to the insight that Zosia must be depicted as a human being and not as the monster she was buried as. Zosia had a roundish facial shape, and the distance between her nose and mouth was long, Nilsson said. She also had a smooth vertical forehead over wide-set eye sockets. Her skin color was decided by DNA and isotopic analysis, possibly pointing toward southern Sweden, he added. Okay, this is, again, new data. So this is an old story that was republished recently again, because of the new data that emerged. Okay, so it is from Poland, but her look and DNA could point to Sweden. We didn't know this before, so that's also new. So now we see another region of the world being involved into this vampire or so-called vampire stories. And now he continues speaking, Nilsson. An interesting face, no vampire, just a young woman, possibly from a wealthy family, but clearly marked by her diseases. What happened to her? Well, in history, people suspected of having supernatural powers were often buried in a specific way, such as with their faces down, tied with ropes in the fetal position. I also didn't know this. Decapitated, pressed to the ground with a rock, or with their chest stabbed, according to the NCU researchers. When members of a given community were suspicious of a person, they sometimes opened the grave and added such quote-unquote anti-vampire artifacts, such as the sickle and padlock found in Zosia's unmarked grave. Yeah, we saw the same photo before. Dr. Dariusz Polinsky, a professor from the Institute of Archaeology at NCU, noted from the farming tool how the farming tool likely did not seriously harm the woman. Okay, I'm glad for that. At the time of her death, since her head was not cut off and the backbone remained in pristine condition. Upon her discovery, the media soon dubbed the skeleton a vampire. And while catchy, Polinsky said it's not exactly accurate. Our discovery did not necessarily indicate that a vampire was buried at that site, he explained. I would prefer to consider these practices as anti-vampire procedures. The woman could possibly have some physical impairment or mental disorder and was thus mistreated by her neighbors. That's what I was talking about. And if this was happening, my heart goes to her, because it could be a witch hunt. We don't know. And thus mistreated by her neighbors, who thought she would scare them after death. Yes. The researchers pushed back on the idea that the woman was a victim of some type of execution or punishment. Okay, this is encouraging, such as witchcraft, because she, quote unquote, was buried with care, probably in a coffin, although no remains of wood were found in the excavation site. Still, a visible contour of a pillow underlying her head was observed, which can suggest a high social status of a family she was born in, the team said in a press release. She was buried with her head covered with a bonnet. I don't know what is that. Probably made of silk, because remains of this material were found in the site, the team said. The bonnet was decorated with a silver or golden weft. The research team said no other tampering Zosia's grave was visible. The scientists also noticed mysterious greenish spots on her palate, which could indicate contact with an object made of copper or copper alloy, the team said in a press release about the 2022 discovery. Had it been a coin, it could have been placed as the third means of protection against her return to the world of the living. One detail that drew the archaeologist's attention was the fact that the girl's left arm was not placed along her body, but turned left, which the team called a mystery still to solve. Okay, that's another new detail. And now they're mentioning other anti-vampire burials, which we mentioned or not. It's the end of the article, so we don't care. But I also want to share shortly just the ending of this article, which is Serbian, translated in English, about the same lady, right? I just want to show that so people can see. But they have more info when it comes to her condition than Fox News. I don't know why is that if they're drawing from the same source, but I wanna read this. Okay, the vampire died of cancer. See, Fox News didn't mention that. Further investigations revealed that she was suffering from a tumor in the area of the sternum, which would have caused considerable pain and contributed to the development of the deformity of the chest. She was 18 to 20 years old at the time of her death. Okay. Genetic and isotopic analysis show that the vampire woman could have been of Scandinavian origin. Although it is only speculation, the tumor may have contributed to the fainting spells, severe headaches, or pathological mental illnesses. In the 17th century, where disease and war raged across Europe, the climate of fear of the supernatural would likely label her as a witch or possessed by a spirit, which is why she was buried as a quote-unquote vampire. Sad story, I have to say, but I'm glad that these two articles brought different angles of her life. Basically, she was not understood to be a vampire, but hey, what if? So what if she comes back as one? So let us protect ourselves from her. Let us, turn on her left arm, not to point towards her, but maybe something else. What would that mean? They don't know. I don't know. That's why the sickle was there. That's why they're still investigating, trying to understand what. But I'll be so happy if I would know that it wasn't a witch hunt and she wasn't killed or maybe mistreated, even if she had these mental or physical ailments like cancer and stuff like that, which back then they couldn't understand well. But these are the things that we grow as the whole humanity will learn, and hopefully when we learn about something, our attitude would change and not always act in fear of something new and then label people as this or that. Paul, would you like to say something about this? And then I'll also have you guys having concluding thoughts, but at least when it comes to this story.
Yeah, interesting that she covers, they can kind of tell that she might have been more affluent. She's not buried in a pine box or just dumped in a grave. This seems very, very purposeful. Also interesting that they could tell now that she had a tumor in her chest, whatever that contributed to, right? So just putting pieces together that, maybe vampirism happened to someone that was still alive. Maybe someone could die of pretty well a natural cause, but there was still suspicion or fear or reality that someone could come out of the grave afterwards. So they took these protective measures. Kind of neat that we could piece it together pretty well. Poor lady that I think by the 17th century they knew a little bit about cancer, but obviously they couldn't treat her or something happened that she had this tumor. Yeah, and just the double and triple protective things buried in the sickle and the lock and the whole thing, as they were taking this as serious business.
Yeah, I kind of liked, that it pointed out that this was not that they thought that she was a vampire, but they were just safeguarding against her possibly coming back. I will say they didn't really do her any favors with that 3D model they made. That's a stern looking woman. They're like, oh yeah, this, and this. And then you look at the picture and you're like, she looks like somebody I wouldn't want to cross in the daylight, let alone in the dark. So yeah, I think that's good. I think that's a good way to kind of end the segment too, and talking about, she had cancer, so they've obviously been looking, at exactly what was up with her. She came from an affluent family, she wasn't native to the area necessarily. The fact that it looks like she was buried with her head on a pillow, I mean, that's a sweet touch. You know, and just whatever was wrong with her was enough that, you know, they kind of thought, yeah, we don't necessarily want that coming back and spreading, so we're going to do some things just to safeguard against that. I like that.
Thank you. I just want to say before we have this concluding session, please keep subscribing. Please keep praying for our ministry channel, because it's more than a podcast. It is a ministry channel, including all the weird topics we're covering, because they all have purpose. It's not just to, you know, have fun. We are aiming to go very soon to you know, the 100th episode and 1K subscribers, but that's not stopping. I feel like we're basically starting. This was just the introduction, these 20 months of hard work and labor. And someone mentioned before, yeah, I wouldn't mind doing this full time, but I'm so far from it, and you know, I have to support myself with having a full-time job so I can afford doing this. So please subscribe, share links, like, comment. All this will help us with the YouTube algorithm. I also want to say Friday, Sean and I plan to comment on the latest government/UFO secrets and discoveries being, you know, publicly now available. When the new president is coming, he's forcing on things to be more transparent and, you know, for the audience, for the public. I mean, not for the audience. So we plan to watch some of those videos, comment on them. Similar thing that we're doing now with you know, potential vampire excavation sites. We will be doing with the, you know, possibility of the UFOs. I'm also planning to bring, finally, after weeks of negotiation with one guy who is now Christian, but was like Ben and like Sean. He used to be into witchcraft and stuff like that. So he had cases of doppelganger and insane spiritual warfare before he came to Christ. I hope, after attempting for a few times to bring him on the channel, that he will finally come on Sunday. He doesn't always respond to my messages, so I don't know. If he doesn't come, then we'll do something else. But basically, these are the plans for this coming week. Of course, Ben, you're welcome to join us in that UFO government session with Sean, because I know you love these things, but only if you have time and energy to join us, so we can tackle more of this mysterious, weird sci-fi stuff. Okay, when it comes to the concluding thoughts, what is it there that we can say about these articles, and is there any way that we can relate this to the Bible, theology, and maybe even spiritual warfare for us as Christians? Paul?
Yeah, I think the archaeology is interesting. As we get some details, it's still, I don't know a lot about it. It's not something I follow a ton, but it seems like we're piecing together stories and we only have some of the clues. So I think we need to be careful to jump to conclusions. It'll be super interesting to see what they find as they dig into these more, and if there's more graves, or they find more sites, or you know, older stuff as it comes. As it comes to the spiritual world, spiritual warfare, I would say, from what we can see, probably a lot of this had to do with illness and misunderstanding it. But I still find it interesting that this sort of archetype has persisted over millennia now. You know, it probably comes from somewhere, and there probably is a reality to either illness or things coming out of the grave or whatever you would associate with a vampire, transformation into beasts and attacking people or haunting family members. I think if that stuff's real, it probably isn't an accident. It's probably something that's being participated in, maybe not with exact results, but someone seeking power or along those lines, a ritual, a connection, something very not Christian at very least. So for the Christians out there, you know, stay away from it. From anyone that's curious or on the fence, you know, it's not healthy. It's not a good thing to pursue, and there's a better way. And hopefully we can keep to learn about that and see what happens. And I'd be remiss to leave this up before we go. You guys are talking about being superstitious. And, you know, if we're going to leave it to superstition, let's talk about writings on the wall and ladders about to fall. A 13-month-old baby that broke the looking glass, and 7 years of bad luck. But good thing it's all in your past.
Oh man, how do I follow that? No, that's a great closing. I just, yeah, just to kind of tie it all together, so many different cultures around the world reaching, back for thousands of years have the concept of what we call, vampire today. Whether it's a demon or whatever, Hebrew myths, right? They have the Estries, the Aluka, the Mozart's Dom. I looked into so much of this stuff. Mesopotamia, they have the Ekamu and the Edamu, Lilitu, which is also Lilith, which a lot of people today still know and associate her with being like the mother of vampires. And, she's described as being a demoness, or maybe like a harpy or a screech owl or something. As far as it goes in relating it to the Bible, Aluka is a word that's mentioned in Proverbs 30:15, and it can translate as a blood-lusting monster, right? Which can be a vampire by, what we call it today. We didn't even get to talk about, the Dampir, which is a cross, right? It's like an Albanian word. It means tooth and to drink. But they're like a mix of human and vampire, right? They're like a half breed, like a daywalker, like Blade. And a lot of times they were credited as being vampire hunters, having the best of both worlds. Strigoi in Romania, the Upir in Russia or Ukraine. The Greeks had vampires, Western Europeans. The French had the Revenants. Germany had Nachzaherad, or however the heck you pronounce it in German. As long as you're hawking up a hairball, it's probably going to sound right. Like they all have it, right? It comes from somewhere. It's not just, one area of Poland. These are places, that were spread out across the globe. And yes, we've modernized it. We've turned it into a romantic fantasy. But when you look, at the cultures of the time that really kind of developed, the modern day fantasy, you don't see them flying. You don't see them with superhuman power. Some of them are more like a succubus, right? They're, a seductive mistress, demoness. That sneaks into you at night to steal your life force away, and so there's a tie that kind of binds these all together. And I think that especially if you hold to a divine council worldview, there is explanatory power in believing that there is more than just, the Bible says there's angels and the Bible says there's demons, right? There's a lot of different spiritual entities that exist in the spiritual realm that interact with us. It could be a type of demon, in the hierarchy of demons, just like there are types of angels. There are different things, seraphim, versus cherubim, right? Like they're two different names. Are they Elohim? Yes, but they're two different things. They're not just angels unless they're delivering a message. Anyway, so the concept of this maybe being a demonic, possession type thing, or a demon that can shapeshift and look like a loved one, like all of this stuff, I think is still on the table. It's still worth noting. Because it's interesting, especially when you talk about spiritual warfare. You can dumb spiritual warfare down to the point of, when Jesus, talked to demons possessing people, his whole ministry was basically shut up and get out, right? That is what he said. And so if you're praying for somebody, if you're, going to anoint a house, if you're going to do something like that, I find it helpful, though not necessary, to kind of have a vibe or an understanding of what is it that you're actually up against. Maybe it's a, seductress, pornographic, life stealing entity that is affecting you or your household or somebody that you care about. And, you know, you need to go to war against that stuff, kick it out. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Throughout the episode, we didn't mention that a very popular part of the lore when it comes to vampires is like it can't come into your house until you allow it to come. So I was like, this is almost like demonic. Like demonic, yeah, can attack you, but can it come in your home and invade you unless you open some sort of a door? Uh, I don't know. Maybe Sean and I covered so many stories with supernatural attacks of people having sleeping paralysis, seeing these shadowy entities coming in, disappearing. We don't know, was everyone always into the occult, Ouija board, summoning demons, you know, whatever, or were some of these people even religious or semi-decent people? But I was just thinking how, you know, vampire, let's say it comes before your doorstep, uh, and it's not allowed to come in, and you don't know if it's vampire because during the daytime it looks like a regular human being, and it says, "May I come in?" And it's like there is a spiritual side of that. It asks you to come on your territory. Once when you grant it, and you're ignorant if this is truly a vampire because you think it's just a human being. So if you grant the access to your land, to your territory, and it's a way stronger entity than you are, then what did you do? And once when you realize, is it too late? Do you pray? Do you do the spiritual warfare? Bring an exorcist? How do you even deal with the vampiric demon? And you know, how is that even manifested? How is it? You know, it's not. You know, it's so many vague stuff when it comes to this lore, and so many interesting and scary things. So that's also another thing to think about when it comes to the whole topic. But Ben and Sean. Sean is still in my head because we have to make an episode. Ben and Paul, thank you so much for finding time for myself and for the audience. It's been less than 2 hours, and I'm almost proud of that. Because when I tell people, yeah, it's 2-3 hours long, they're complaining. I'm like, dude, that's just like a normal time. Like first hour is always just to warm up, right? Yeah, but thank you so much for this time. I hope you guys enjoyed like I did. Okay, Sean is saying reject, renounce, rebuke, revoke. So basically it's RRRR. Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, so you know, we'll see you some other time. Thank you everyone. God bless you. Love you. Please keep subscribing. Subscribe to Ember's podcast as well. And I'll hope to see you there Friday and Sunday. God bless you all.